In this video, we're going to look at constants, variables, and scope. So here I have another test class I set up just called DTTest0902, and I have a number of constants and variables declared just to kind of explore around with scope, that type of thing a little bit. Now what scope means is where a variable has a value. Now you have something like a constant, and a constant to Ruby is declared as a constant because it starts with a capital letter. So it's similar to how a class starts with a capital letter, a constant starts with a capital letter. And you have scope of constants where this is overall your whole program once this gets loaded versus just inside the class. So in order to access this constant, I can just reference the whole program, and I'll show you that in a second. And this one I actually have to reference the class. And then here we have a class variable, which we talked about in other videos. The new variable that I've actually introduced here is a local variable, and I've declared one here. Now this is where scope gets really important to understand. This variable essentially only exists within this method. So I went down here and I put this variable here to print out again, and it doesn't have a value down here. So when I run this, you're going to see what happens here when I try to go ahead and run these methods here. And finally, I've included a little method called initialize, and this just gets called automatically when I instantiate this object. So let's go ahead into IRB and load this guy up. Remember, we can just do tab completion, and what I really like is it's smart enough to go and auto-complete some of it. So we got a true on it. So I'm going to do a new instantiation, and you're going to see it's going to come back and say that this ivar has a value here, because that's what we're doing essentially right here. So let's go ahead and hit enter. There we go. It says, oh, ivar already has a value. It's 12. So if I go and look at D now, I'm going to essentially get the same thing. So now let's call our first method right here. It's going to set up that local var and then print out these other values here. There we go. And it should just be the class var, which is 11, yep, the ivar, which is 12, and finally 13, which is a local var. So that worked pretty good. Now let's call sm2, which should give us the class var, which is 11, the ivar, which is 12, and then local var. We'll see what it does with that. Well, that's what I was expecting. I don't know if that's what you were expecting, but you're seeing it saying here, it's undefined local variable and method name local var. You see, it doesn't know, this method here, when I call it, doesn't know what this is declared to be. It's just a nil object. It doesn't know what it is. And it's giving you that error saying, hey, I don't know what this is. That's because this ceased to exist as far as the Ruby interpreter was called when it hit this end. This went out of memory, got garbage collected, so it doesn't exist on here. That's an example of scope. Now, just to show you how you access from like the IRB here, how we access that constant, I'm gonna type in this. What this essentially does is says I want to access from the overall object this constant, and so that's the outer one. Now if I put in here and put the class name dtest and do that and put constant class, it should give me the 10, and there you go. That's a way of referencing particular parts of a class, and this one just is getting essentially the kernel. It's kind of assumed out there. So that's a little bit about scope and variables and constants and how you actually create and use them. And the thing to pay attention to is that constants start with a capital letter, class variables start with these two @ signs, a instance variable, and we have down here this ivar, starts with one @ sign, and a local variable starts with an lowercase letter such as this one. And the scope is specific to where it's declared. So a local variable is going to be local to the method, and in some cases local to a block, as we'll see in other videos.